The Varieties of Religious Experience, a Study in Human Nature by William James. We are in lectures 11, 12, 13, Saintliness. We're probably in 13 right now. In winter, he suffered very much from the frost. If he stretched out his feet, they lay bare on the floor and froze. If he gathered them up, the blood became all on fire in his legs, and this was great pain. His feet were full of sores, his legs dropsical, his knees bloody and seared, his loins covered with scars from the horsehair, his body wasted, his mouth parched with intense thirst, and his hands tremulous from weakness. Well, that's one way to prevent temptation, is that no one's going to want you after that. Amid these torments, he spent his nights and days and endured them all out of the greatness of the love which he bore in his heart to the divine and eternal wisdom, our Lord Jesus Christ, whose agonizing sufferings he sought to imitate. Well, isn't the doctrine that stuff counted for them? Kind of undoes that thought, right? After a time, he gave up this penitential exercise of the door, and instead of it, he took up his abode in a very small cell and used the bench, which was so narrow and short that he could not stretch himself upon it, as his bed. In this hole or upon the door he lay at night in his usual bonds for about 8 years. It was also his custom during the space of 25 years, provided he was staying in the convent, never to go after compline in winter into any warm room or to the convent stove to warm himself, no matter how cold it might be, unless he was obliged to do so for other reasons. Throughout all these years he never took a bath, either a water or a sweating bath, and this he did in order to mortify his comfort-seeking body. He practiced during a long time such rigor poverty that he would neither receive nor touch a penny, either with leave or without it. For a considerable time he strove to attain such a high degree of purity that he would neither scratch nor touch any part of his body, save only his hands and feet. And that's continuing and finishing the quote from the Life of the Blessed Henry Suso by himself, translated by T.F. Knox, London, 1865, page 56 to 80, abridged. I spare you the recital of Suso's self-inflicted tortures from thirst. It is pleasant to know that after his 40th year, God showed him by a series of visions that he had sufficiently broken down the natural man, and that he might leave these exercises off. His case is distinctly pathological, but he does not seem to have had the alleviation which some ascetics have enjoyed, of an alteration of sensibility capable of actually turning torments into a perverse kind of pleasure. The founder of the Sacred Heart Order, for example, we read that her love of pain and suffering was insatiable. She said that she could cheerfully live till the day of judgment, provided she might always have matter for suffering for God, but that to live a single day without suffering would be intolerable. She said again that she was devoured with 2 unassuageable fevers, one for the Holy Communion, the other for suffering, humiliation, and annihilation. Nothing but pain, she continually said in her letters, makes my life supportable. Rogad, Histoire de la Bienheureuse Marguerite, Marie, Paris, 1894, page 265 and 171. Compare also pages 386 and 387. So much for the phenomena to which the ascetic impulse will in certain persons give rise, and the ecclesiastically consecrated character 3 minor branches of self-mortification have been recognized as indispensable pathways to perfection. I refer to the chastity, obedience, and poverty, which the monk vows to observe. And upon the heads of obedience and poverty, I will make a few remarks. First, of obedience. The secular life of our 20th century opens with this virtue held in no high esteem. The duty of the individual to determine his own conduct and profit or suffer by the consequences seems, on the contrary, to be one of our best-rooted contemporary Protestant social ideals. So much that it is difficult even imaginatively to comprehend how men possessed of an inner life of their own could ever have come to think the subjection of its will to that of other finite creatures recommendable. I confess that to myself it seems something of a mystery, yet it evidently corresponds to a profounder interior need of many persons, and we must do our best to understand it. On the lowest possible plane, one sees how the expediency of obedience in a firm ecclesiastical organization must have led to its being viewed as meritorious. Next, experience shows that there are times in everyone's life when one can be better counseled by others than by oneself. Inability to decide is one of the commonest symptoms of fatigued nerves. Friends who see our troubles more broadly often see them more wisely than we do. So it is frequently an act of excellent virtue to consult and obey a doctor, a partner, or a wife. But leaving these lower prudential regions, we find in the nature of some of the spiritual excitements which we have been studying good reasons for idealizing obedience. Obedience may spring from the general religious phenomenon of inner softening and self-surrender and throwing oneself on higher powers. So saving are these attitudes felt to be that, in themselves, apart from utility, they become ideally consecrated, and in obeying a man whose fallibility we see through thoroughly, we nevertheless may feel much as we do when we resign our will to that of infinite wisdom. Add self-despair and the passion of self-crucifixion to this, and obedience becomes an ascetic sacrifice, agreeable quite irrespective of whatever prudential uses it might have. It is, as a sacrifice, a mode of mortification, that obedience is primarily conceived by Catholic writers. A sacrifice which man offers to God, and of which he himself, both the priest and the victim, by poverty he immolates his exterior possessions, by chastity he immolates his body, by obedience he completes the sacrifice, and gives to God all that he yet holds as his own. His two most precious goods, his intellect and his will. The sacrifice is then complete and unreserved, a genuine holocaust, for the entire victim is now consumed for the honor of God. Verjune, Introduction à la vie mystique, 1899, page 277. The Holocaust simile goes back at least as far as Ignatius Loyola. Accordingly, in Catholic discipline, we obey our superior, not as a mere man, but as the representative of Christ, obeying God and Him by our intention. Obedience is easy, but when the textbook theologians marshal collectively all the reasons for recommending it, the mixture sounds to our ears rather odd. One of the greatest consolations of the monastic life, says a Jesuit authority, is the assurance we have that in obeying we can commit no fault. The superior may commit a fault in commanding you to do this thing or that. But you are certain that you commit no fault so long as you obey, because God will only ask you if you have duly performed what orders you have received. Well, Pauline Christianity basically makes the point that a person should obey and believe whatever the government or the people in charge have for you, right? And if you can furnish a clear account in that respect, you are absolved entirely, whether the things you did were opportune or whether there were not something better that might have been done. These are questions not asked of you, but rather of your superior. The moment what you did was done obediently, God wipes it out of your account and charges it to the superior, so that St. Jerome will exclaimed in celebrating the advantages of obedience, O sovereign liberty, O holy and blessed security by which one becomes almost impeccable. St. John Climacus is of the same sentiment when he calls obedience an excuse before God. In fact, when God asks why you have done this or that, and you reply, it is because I was so ordered by my superiors, God will ask for no other excuse. As a passenger in a good vessel with a good pilot need give himself no further concern, but may go to sleep in peace because the pilot has charge over all and watches for him. So a religious person who lives under the yoke of obedience goes to heaven as if while sleeping, that is, while leaning entirely on the conduct of his superiors, who are the pilots of his vessel, and keep watch for him continually. It is no small thing of a truth to be able to cross the stormy sea of life on the shoulders and in the arms of another. Yet that is just the grace which God accords to those who live under the yoke of obedience. Their superior bears all their burdens. A certain grave doctor said that he would rather spend his life in picking up straws by obedience than by his own responsible choice busy himself with the loftiest works of charity, because one is certain of following the will of God in whatever one may do from obedience, but never certain in the same degree of anything which we may do of our own proper movement. Alfonso Rodriguez, S.J., Pratique de la Perfección Chrétienne, Part 3, Treatise 5, Chapter 10. One should read the letters in which Ignatius Loyola recommends obedience as the backbone of his order, if one would gain insight into the full spirit of its cult. Letters 51 and 120 of the collection, translated into French by Boy in Paris, 1870. They are too long to quote, but Ignatius's belief is so vividly expressed in a couple sayings reported by companions that though they have been so often cited, I will ask your permission to copy them once more. I ought, an early biographer reports him as saying, on entering religion, and therefore to place myself entirely in the hands of God, and of him who takes his place by his authority, I ought to desire that my superior should oblige me to give up my own judgment and to conquer my own mind. Well, wouldn't it be better just to direct your own judgment, right? I ought to set up no difference between one superior and another, but recognize them all as equal before God, whose place they fill, for if I distinguish persons, I weaken the spirit of obedience. Well, not necessarily, right? In the hands of my superior, I must be a soft wax, a thing from which he is to require whatever pleases him, be it to write or receive letters, to speak or not to speak to such a person, or the like, and I must put all my fervor in executing zealously and exactly what I am ordered. I must consider myself as a corpse which has neither intelligence nor will, be like a mass of matter which, without resistance, lets itself be placed wherever it may please anyone, like a stick in the hands of an old man who uses it according to his needs and places it where it suits him. So must I be under the hands of the order to serve it in the way it judges most useful. I must never ask of the superior to be sent to a particular place, to be employed in a particular duty. I must consider nothing as belonging to me personally, and as regards the things I use, be like a statue, which lets itself be stripped and never opposes resistance. Bartioli, Michel 2:13. The other saying is reported by Rodriguez in the chapter from which I, a moment ago, made quotations. When speaking of the Pope's authority, Rodriguez writes, St. Ignatius said, when general of his company, that if the Holy Father were to order him to set sail in the first bark which he might find in the port of Ostia, near Rome, and to abandon himself to the sea, without a mast, without sails, without oars or rudder, or any of the things which are needful for navigation or subsistence, he would obey, not only with alacrity, but without anxiety or repugnance, and even with a great internal satisfaction. Rodriguez cited Part 3, Treatise 5, Chapter 6, with a solitary, concrete example of the extravagance to which the virtue we are considering has been carried. I will pass the topic next in order. Sister Marie Claire of Port Royal had been greatly imbued with the holiness and excellence of M. de Langres. This prelate, soon after he came to Port Royal, said to her one day, seeing her so tenderly attached to Mother Angelique, that it would perhaps be better not to speak to her again. Marie Claire, greedy of obedience, took this inconsiderable word for an oracle of God, and from that day forward remained for several years without once speaking to her sister. Our next, Saint Beuve, History de Port Royal, 1, 346. Our next topic shall be poverty, felt at all times and under all creeds as one adornment of a saintly life. Well, rightful use of money. Not making it about the money, about what you can do with the money, that sort of thing is universal. Seeking to be poor, I don't think most religions actually have that. Yet it appears no paradox at all, but perfectly reasonable, the moment one recollects how easily higher excitements hold lower cupidities in check. Having just quoted the Jesuit Rodriguez on the subject of obedience, I will to give immediately a concrete turn to our discussion of poverty. Also, read you a page from his chapter on this latter virtue. You must remember that he is writing instructions for monks of his own order, and bases them all on the text, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." If any one of you, he says, will know whether or not he is really poor in spirit, let him consider whether he loves the ordinary consequences and effects of poverty, which are hunger, thirst, cold, fatigue, and the denudation of all conveniences. See if you were glad to wear a worn-out habit, full of patches. See if you are glad when something is lacking to your meal, when you are passed by in serving it, when what you receive is distasteful to you, when your cell is out of repair. If you are not glad of these things, if instead of loving them you avoid them, then there is proof that you have not attained the perfection of poverty of spirit. Rodriguez then goes on to describe the practice of poverty in more detail. The first point is that which St. Ignatius proposes in his Constitutions, when he says, "Let no one use anything as if it were his private possession." A religious person, he says, ought in respect to all the things that he uses to be like a statue, which one may drape with clothing, but which feels no grief and makes no resistance when one strips it again. It is in this way that you should feel towards your clothes, your books, your cell, and everything else that you make use of. If ordered to quit them, or to exchange them for others, have no more sorrow than if you were a statue being uncovered. In this way you will avoid using them, and as if they were your private possession. But if, when you give up your cell or yield possession of this or that object or exchange it for another, you feel repugnance and are not like a statue, that shows that you view these things as if they were your private property. And this is why our holy founder wished the superiors to test their monks, somewhat as God tested Abraham, and to put their poverty and their obedience to trial, that by this means they may become acquainted with the degree of their virtue, and gain a chance to make ever farther progress in perfection, making the one move out of his room when he finds it comfortable and is attached to it, taking away from another a book of which he is fond, or obliging a third to exchange his garment for a worse one. Otherwise we should end by acquiring a species of property in all these several objects, and, little by little, the wall of poverty that surrounds us and constitutes our principal defense would be thrown down. The ancient fathers of the desert used often thus to treat their companions. Saint Dositheus, being sick nurse, desired a certain knife, and asked Saint Dorotheus for it, not for his private use, but for employment in the infirmary of which he had charge. Whereupon Saint Dorotheus answered him, Ha, Dositheus, so that knife pleases you so much, will you be the slave of a knife or the slave of Jesus Christ? Do you not blush with shame at wishing that a knife should be your master? I will not let you touch it. Which reproach and refusal had such an effect upon the holy disciple that since that time he never touched the knife again. Therefore, in our rooms, Father Rodriguez continues, there must be no other furniture than a bed, a table, a bench, and a candlestick. Things purely necessary, and nothing more. It is not allowed among us that our cells should be ornamented with pictures or aught else. Well, biblically, even New Testament, the whole graven image thing is not allowed. Neither armchairs, carpets, curtains, nor any sort of cabinet or bureau of any elegance. Neither is it allowed us to keep anything to eat, either for ourselves or for those who may come to visit us. We must ask permission to go to the refectory, even for a glass of water, and finally we may not keep a book in which we can write a line, or which we may take away with us. One cannot deny that thus we are in great poverty. But this poverty is at the same time a great repose and a great perfection, for it would be inevitable in case a religious person were allowed to own superfluous possessions, that these things would greatly occupy his mind, be it to acquire them, to preserve them, or to increase them, so that in not permitting us at all to own them, all these inconveniences are remedied. Among the various good reasons why the company forbids secular persons to enter our cells, the principal one is that thus we may the easier be kept in poverty. After all, we are all men, and if we were to receive people of the world into our rooms, we should not have the strength to remain within the bounds prescribed, but should at least wish to adorn them with some books to give the visitors a better opinion of our scholarship. Rodriguez, Part 3, Treatise 3, Chapters 6 and 7. And I myself don't tell people all the books I've read, or, you're never going to see all my books in a single video or something like that. I think all my videos, there's still books hidden, but definitely don't acquire books so people can, be one of those people, right? That, you have a pile, it's like, well, if you don't read your books, don't try to make people think you're something else because of your possessions of one sort or another. Since Hindu I didn't articulate that too well, but anyways, since Hindu fakirs, Buddhist monks, and Muslim dervishes unite with Jesuits and Franciscans in idealizing poverty as the loftiest individual state, well, maybe they don't put it to that length, though, it is worthwhile to examine into the spiritual grounds for such a seemingly unnatural opinion. And first of those which lie closest to the common human nature, the opposition between the men who have and the men who are is immemorial. Though the gentleman in the old-fashioned sense of the man who is well-born has usually in point of fact been predacious and reveled in lands and goods. Yet, he has never identified his essence with these possessions, but rather with the personal superiorities, the courage, generosity, and pride supposed to be his birthright. To certain, humility may require poverty, but making yourself poor on purpose, pride will creep in again, right? To certain huckstering kinds of consideration, he thanked God. He was forever inaccessible, and if in life's vicissitudes he should become destitute through their lack, he was glad to think that with his sheer valor he was all the freer to work out his salvation. Werner Zubitz
Was hatte, says Lessing's Temple Her, and Nathan the Wise, mein Gott, ich habe nichts. This ideal of the well-born man without possessions was embodied in knight-errantry and Templardom, and hideously corrupted as it has always been, it still dominates sentimentally, if not practically, the military and aristocratic view of life. We glorify the soldier as much as the man absolutely unencumbered, owing nothing but his bare life and willing to toss that up at any moment when the cause commands him. He is representative of unhampered freedom in ideal directions. The laborer who pays with his person day by day and has no rights invested in the future offers also much of this ideal detachment. Like the savage, he may make his bed wherever his right arm can support him, and from his simple and athletic attitude of observation, the property owner seems buried and smothered in ignoble externalities and trammels, wading in straw and rubbish to his knees. The claims which things make are corrupters of manhood, mortgages on the soul, and a drag anchor on our progress towards the Empyrean. Everything I meet with, writes Whitefield, seems to carry this voice with it. Go thou and preach the gospel, be a pilgrim on earth, have no party or certain dwelling place. My heart echoes back, Lord Jesus, help me to do or suffer thy will. Well, doesn't the Bible say that Jesus didn't speak the doctrine of the one who sent him? He didn't speak his own doctrine, he spoke the one who sent him, and it's not his will, but again, the will of the one who sent him. So why not just turn straight to the person that Jesus was worshiping in the Garden of Gethsemane and elsewhere, right? Or the being, or, however you're going to phrase that. When thou seest me in danger of nestling, in pity, in tender pity, put a thorn in my nest to prevent me from it. R. Phillip, The Life and Times of George Whitefield, London, 1842. I misspoke because, of course, I was raised Christian and with the idea of divine personage and that sort of thing. The loathing of capital with which our laboring classes today are growing more and more infected seems largely composed of this sound sentiment of antipathy for lives based on mere having. As an anarchist poet writes, not by accumulating riches, but by giving away that which you have, shall you become beautiful. You must undo the wrappings, not case yourself in fresh ones. Not by multiplying clothes shall you make your body sound and healthy, but rather by discarding them. For a soldier who is going on a campaign does not seek what fresh furniture he can carry on his back, but rather what he can leave behind, knowing well that every additional thing which he cannot freely use and handle is an impediment. Edward Carpenter, Towards Democracy, page 362, abridged. In short, lives based on having are less free than lives based on either on doing or on being. And, in the interest of action, people subject to spiritual excitement throw away possessions as so many clogs. Only those who have no private interests can follow an ideal straight away. Sloth and cowardice creep in with every dollar or guinea we have to guard. When a brother novice came to St. Francis, saying, Father, it would be a great consolation to me to own a psalter, but even supposing that our general should concede to me this indulgence, still, I should like also to have your consent. Francis put him off with examples of Charlemagne, Roland, and Oliver, pursuing the infidels in sweat and labor, and finally dying on the field of battle. So care not, he said, for owning books and knowledge, but care rather for works of goodness. Well, you can combine the two, right? And when some weeks later the novice came again to talk of his craving for the psalter, Francis said, after you have got your psalter, you will crave a breviary, and after you have got your breviary, you will sit in your stall like a grand prelate, and will say to your brother, hand me my breviary. And thenceforward he denied all such requests, saying, a man possesses of learning only so much as comes out of him in action, and a monk is a good preacher only so far as his deeds proclaim him such. For every tree is known by its fruits. Speculum perfectionis, edited P. Sabatier, Paris, 1898, page 10 and 13. But beyond this, more worthily athletic attitude, involved in doing and being, there is in the desire of not having something profounder still, something related to that fundamental mystery of religious experience, the satisfaction found in absolute surrender to the larger power. So long as any secular safeguard is retained, so long as any residual prudential guarantee is clung to, so long the surrender is incomplete, the vital crisis is not past, fear still stands sentinel, and mistrust of the divine obtains. We hold by two anchors, looking to God, it is true, after a fashion, but also holding by our proper machinations. In certain medical experiences, we have the same critical point to overcome. A drunkard, R, a morphine or cocaine maniac, offers himself to be cured. He appeals to the doctor to wean him from his enemy, but he dares not face blank abstinence. The tyrannical drug is still an anchor to windward. He hides supplies of it among his clothing, arranges secretly to have it smuggled in case of need. Even so, an incompletely regenerate man still trusts in his own expedients. His money is like the sleeping potion which the chronically wakeful patient keeps beside his bed. He throws himself on God. But if he should need the other help, there it will be also. Everyone knows cases of this incomplete and ineffective desire for reform. Drunkards whom, with all their self-reproaches and resolves, one perceives to be quite unwilling seriously to contemplate never being drunk again, really to give up anything on which we have relied, to give it up definitively, for good and all, and forever, signifies one of those radical alterations of character which came under our notice in the lectures on conversion. In it, the inner man rolls over into an entirely different position of equilibrium, lives in a new center of energy from this time on, and the turning point and hinge of all such operations seems usually to involve the sincere acceptance of certain nakedness and destitutions. Accordingly, throughout the annals of the saintly life, we find this ever-recurring note: fling yourself upon God's province without making any reserve whatever. Take no thought for the morrow. Sell all you have and give it to the poor. Only when the sacrifice is ruthless and reckless will the higher safety really arrive. As a concrete example, let me read a page from the biography of Antoinette Bourignon, a good woman, much persecuted in her day by both Protestants and Catholics, because she would not take her religion at second hand. When a young girl in her father's house, she spent whole nights in prayer, oft repeating, "Lord, what wilt thou have me do?" And being one night in a most profound penitence, she said from the bottom of her heart, "O my Lord, what must I do to please thee? For I have nobody to teach me. Speak to my soul, and it will hear thee." At that instant she heard, as if another had spoke within her, "Forsake all earthly things, separate thyself from the love of creatures, deny thyself." She was quite astonished, not understanding this language, and mused long on these 3 points, thinking how she could fulfill them. She thought she could not live without earthly things, nor without loving the creatures, nor without loving herself. Yet she said, "By thy grace, I will do it, Lord." But when she would perform her promise, she knew not where to begin, having thought on the religious in the monasteries, that they forsook all earthly things by their being shut up in a cloister, and the love of themselves by subjecting their wills. She asked leave of her father to enter into a cloister of the barefoot Carmelites, but he would not permit it, saying he would rather see her laid in her grave. This seemed to her a great cruelty, for she thought to find in the cloister the true Christians she had been seeking. But she found afterwards that he knew the cloisters better than she, for after he had forbidden her, and told her he would never permit her to be a religious, nor give any money to enter there. Yet she went to Father Lawrence, the director, and offered to serve in the monastery and work hard for her bread, and be contented with little if he would receive her. Now, you can probably be more religious, was actually the point, right? We'll see. At which he smiled and said, "That cannot be. We must have money to build. We take no maids without money. You must find the way to get it, else there is no entry here." This astonished her greatly, and she was thereby undeceived as to the cloisters, resolving to forsake all company and live alone till it should please God to show her what she ought to do, and whither to go. She asked always earnestly, "When shall I be perfectly thine, O my God?" And she thought he still answered her, "When thou shalt no longer possess anything, and shalt die to thyself." And, "Where shall I do that, Lord?" He answered her, "In the desert." This made so strong an impression on her soul that she aspired after this. But being a maid of 18 years only, she was afraid of unlucky chances and was never used to travel, and knew no way. She laid aside all these doubts and said, "Lord, thou wilt guide me how and where it shall please thee. It is for thee that I do it. I will lay aside my habit of a maid, and will take that of a hermit, that I may pass unknown." Having then secretly made ready this habit, while her parents thought to have married her, her father having promised her to a rich French merchant, she prevented the time, and on Easter evening, having cut her hair, put on the habit, and slept a little, she went out of her chamber about 4 a.m, taking nothing but 1 penny to buy bread for that day. Now, covering the head is, the biblical thing that women do, right? It's not just for people who've taken the vow, right? And it being said to her in the going out, "Where's thy faith? In a penny?" She threw it away, begging pardon of God for her fault, and saying, "No, Lord, my faith is not in a penny, but in thee alone." Thus she went away wholly delivered from the heavy burthen of the cares and good things of this world, and found her soul so satisfied that she no longer wished for anything upon earth, resting entirely upon God, with only this fear lest she should be discovered and be obliged to return home, for she felt already more content in this poverty than she had done for all her life in the delights of the world. And from an apology for M. Antonia Berignon, London, 1699, page 269 and 270, abridged. I might be able to get into this here. Another example from Starbucks manuscripts collection. At a meeting held at 6 the next morning, I heard a man relate his experience. He said, the Lord asked him if he would confess Christ among the quarrymen with whom he worked, and he said he would. Then he asked him if he would give up to be used of the Lord the $400 he had laid up. And he said he would, and thus the Lord saved him. The thought came to me at once that I had never made a real consecration either of myself or of my property to the Lord, but had always tried to serve the Lord in my way. Now the Lord asked me if I would serve him in his way, and go out alone and penniless if he so ordered. The question was pressed home, and I must decide, to forsake all and have him, or have all and lose him. I soon decided to take him, and the blessed assurance came that he had taken me for his own, and my joy was full. I returned home from the meeting with feelings as simple as a child. I thought all would be glad to hear of the joy of the Lord that possessed me, and so I began to tell the simple story. But to my great surprise, the pastors, for I attended meetings in 3 churches, opposed the experience and said it was fanaticism, and one told the members of his church to shun those that professed it, and I soon found out that my foes were those of my own household. The penny was a small financial safeguard, but an effective spiritual obstacle. Oh, okay, well, I guess I'll say that next time. But whether it's married, unmarried, whatever, the modesty and the rest are stuff you do.